The story of AMC, American Motors Corporation, is one of the most fascinating, overlooked, and tragic tales in the history of the auto industry. It's the story of a company that dared to challenge Detroit's Big Three, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, but in the end, became a nameplate that disappeared into history. AMC wasn't just another car company. It was an underdog that shaped the automotive world in ways most people don't even realize today. From bold innovations to scrappy survival tactics, AMC was the brand that always punched above its weight, but eventually collapsed under the pressure of giants. To understand AMC, you have to start with its roots. In 1954, two smaller automakers, Nash-Kelvinator and Hudson, merged to create American Motors Corporation. At the time, it was a desperate attempt to survive in a world where car companies were dying left and right. After World War II, dozens of independent car brands vanished, and AMC was one of the last outsiders trying to carve out its own place. George W. Mason, the man behind the merger, believed that smaller automakers had no chance of survival unless they joined forces. And he was right. AMC became the largest independent automaker in America, and for a brief moment, it looked like it could actually stand against Detroit's giants. What made AMC different was its willingness to take risks. They didn't have the money to go toe-to-toe with GM or Ford on sheer volume, so instead they focused on niches the big guys ignored. AMC was never afraid to experiment, whether it was compact cars during the 1950s when everyone else was obsessed with giant chrome monsters, or four-wheel drive crossovers decades before the SUV boom took over. They thought differently, and sometimes that made them look strange, but other times, it made them pioneers. One of AMC's earliest successes came with the Rambler. While the Big Three were building massive, gas-guzzling sedans, AMC put out a smaller, more fuel-efficient car that appealed to families who didn't want to spend a fortune on gas. The Rambler hit the sweet spot, and by the late 1950s, AMC was actually outselling Chrysler, becoming America's number 3 automaker. Think about that. This little independent company actually leapfrogged a Detroit giant by simply zigging when everyone else zagged. But AMC's story wasn't just about playing it safe with compact cars. They also had a wild side. In the 1960s and 70s, AMC decided to build muscle cars to compete with the Mustangs, Camaros, and Challengers of the world. Cars like the Javelin, the AMX, and the SC/Rambler showed that AMC could make fast, exciting machines. They even got into racing, something nobody expected from the Underdog brand. For a while, AMC was cool. They were the rebels, the outsiders who weren't afraid to take risks and stand out. At the same time, AMC was pioneering something most people don't give them credit for: the modern SUV. In 1970, AMC bought Jeep from Kaiser, and that move may have been the smartest decision the company ever made. Jeep was a legend, with its roots in World War II, and AMC used it to dominate a market that didn't even exist yet. The Jeep Cherokee, launched in the 1970s, was basically the blueprint for the SUV craze that would sweep the world decades later. Without AMC, there might not even be an SUV market as we know it today. But for every bold move AMC made, they faced brutal challenges. The company was always strapped for cash. Unlike GM, Ford, or Chrysler, they didn't have endless money to develop new models or flood the market with advertising. That meant they had to pick their battles carefully, and sometimes, those battles backfired. AMC made quirky cars like the Gremlin and the Pacer, which were designed to stand out but often ended up being ridiculed. The Pacer, with its giant bubble windows, was called the fishbowl on wheels. It was ahead of its time in some ways, but consumers didn't know what to make of it. And then came the oil crises of the 1970s. Suddenly, everyone wanted smaller, more fuel-efficient cars, the very thing AMC had been making all along. But instead of being perfectly positioned, AMC was too weak financially to capitalize on the moment. The Japanese automakers like Toyota, Honda, and Datsun surged in with high-quality small cars, and AMC just couldn't keep up. They had the right idea but not the resources to win. AMC's struggles in the late 1970s forced them to make a move that would change their destiny forever. They partnered with Renault. At the time, Renault was one of the biggest automakers in Europe and wanted a foothold in the American market. For AMC, this was a lifeline. The French automaker brought in cash, technology, and small car expertise, while AMC gave Renault access to U.S. dealerships and Jeep. It was an unusual marriage, but for a while, it seemed like it might save AMC from collapsing. One of the most important products of this partnership was the Renault Alliance, a compact car built in America but designed in France. When it debuted in the early 1980s, it actually won Motor Trend's Car of the Year award. On paper, it looked like AMC was making a comeback. But reality was harsher. The Alliance was plagued by quality issues, and Americans never fully embraced the French connection. Instead of becoming AMC's savior, the Alliance became another reminder that the company couldn't quite compete with the Japanese brands dominating the economy car market. Meanwhile, Jeep was carrying the company on its back. The success of the Jeep Cherokee in 1984 was groundbreaking. It was a mid-size SUV that combined rugged off-road ability with comfort and practicality. Unlike the massive trucks and full-size SUVs of the past, the Cherokee was manageable for families while still being adventurous. It was the SUV blueprint everyone else copied, from the Ford Explorer to the Toyota 4Runner. Jeep was AMC's crown jewel, the one part of the company that was actually thriving while everything else struggled. But AMC's fate was sealed by the mid-1980s. Their passenger cars were losing ground, their partnership with Renault wasn't delivering the results they needed, and they simply didn't have the money to develop fresh products. The American consumer market was brutal, and without a strong lineup, AMC couldn't survive on Jeep alone. Not yet, anyway. The company was bleeding cash, and Renault itself was facing political and financial challenges back home in France. By 1987, the writing was on the wall. Chrysler, led by Lee Iacocca, swooped in and bought AMC. To many, it looked like AMC had failed, but in reality, Chrysler's real target wasn't the AMC badge, it was Jeep. The Jeep brand was the golden goose, the most valuable asset AMC had ever owned. Chrysler absorbed AMC, kept Jeep, and quietly let the AMC name disappear. In a way, AMC didn't die, it was digested, leaving only its strongest DNA behind. And yet, the legacy of AMC lives on in ways most people don't realize. The Jeep Grand Cherokee, one of the most successful SUVs in history, was already being developed by AMC engineers before Chrysler even bought the company. The compact, fuel-conscious thinking that AMC championed in the 1950s set the stage for how Americans would later think about efficiency. Even the willingness to take risks, whether with the Pacer, the Eagle, or the AMX, helped push the industry forward. AMC may have vanished as a name, but its fingerprints are all over the automotive world today. One of the most fascinating parts of AMC's story is the Eagle. In 1979, long before crossovers became the hottest segment in the auto industry, AMC launched the Eagle, an all-wheel drive passenger car that looked like a normal sedan or wagon but had off-road capability. It was basically the ancestor of the Subaru Outback and every modern AWD crossover. At the time, people didn't really understand what AMC was trying to do, but looking back, it's clear they were decades ahead of the curve. The Eagle was proof that AMC was always thinking differently, even if the market wasn't ready to catch up. That, thinking differently, was both AMC's greatest strength and its fatal flaw. Cars like the Gremlin and the Pacer made AMC stand out, but they also made the company a punchline. The Gremlin, with its chopped-off hatchback design, looked bizarre but was actually one of the first American compact cars. The Pacer, mocked for its bubble-like shape, was built with futuristic ideas like wide doors for easier access and a focus on aerodynamics. These designs were innovative, but in a marketplace dominated by style and conformity, AMC's quirks often scared away the very buyers they needed most. Even so, AMC developed a cult following that has only grown over time. Enthusiasts love the brand because it wasn't afraid to take chances. The Javelin, AMC's muscle car, gave fans an affordable alternative to Mustangs and Camaros. The AMX, a two-seat sports car, went toe-to-toe with Corvettes. And then there was the Rebel Machine, a loud, patriotic muscle car that showed AMC could play the performance game just as hard as anyone else. For a company with a fraction of the budget of the Big Three, these cars left an oversized impact. But AMC's constant battle with money was impossible to overcome. Every innovation came at a cost, and without deep pockets, AMC could never sustain the kind of massive marketing campaigns or high-volume production runs that GM or Ford could. This meant they were always walking a tightrope between being groundbreaking and being bankrupt. By the 1980s, the pressure became unbearable, and even their partnership with Renault couldn't keep the ship afloat. When Chrysler finally acquired AMC in 1987, many saw it as the end of the road, but in reality, it was also the beginning of something much larger. Chrysler instantly gained Jeep, and Jeep would go on to become one of the most valuable and profitable brands in the entire global auto industry. In fact, some argue that Chrysler might not have survived the 1990s without Jeep. The Grand Cherokee, developed by AMC engineers before the buyout, became a blockbuster hit and redefined what an SUV could be. AMC's last great contribution ended up saving another company entirely. And yet, while the AMC name faded into history, its influence never really went away. Today, collectors and enthusiasts celebrate AMC's boldness. The brand's oddball cars, Pacers, Gremlins, AMXs, are cult classics, loved precisely because they dared to be different. Jeep remains a powerhouse, carrying the AMC torch in spirit, if not in name. And the Eagle, once misunderstood, looks like a visionary product when compared to the crossover explosion of the 2000s and beyond. AMC didn't vanish because it lacked ideas, it vanished because it lacked money. It was a company that proved you don't need to be the biggest to make an impact, but also a reminder that in the brutal auto industry, innovation alone isn't enough to survive. AMC's cultural legacy is one of the most fascinating parts of its story. Even though the company disappeared in 1987, AMC cars never really left the spotlight. They started popping up in movies, TV shows, and even music videos, often as symbols of something quirky, rebellious, or ahead of its time. The AMC Pacer, for example, found everlasting fame in the cult comedy Wayne's World. The Gremlin became a pop culture icon in its own right, showing up in everything from cartoon cameos to nostalgic car shows. These weren't just forgotten relics, they became symbols of a brand that dared to be different. Car enthusiasts also keep AMC alive through restoration and preservation. At classic car meets, spotting a pristine AMC Javelin or an AMX always draws a crowd. Collectors love these cars not just because they're rare, but because they tell a story. They represent a time when a small automaker tried to fight the giants and left behind machines that looked and felt different from everything else on the road. The scarcity of AMC vehicles today makes them even more special. Owning one is like owning a piece of underdog history. Beyond nostalgia, AMC has become a kind of cult hero in the automotive world. In forums, clubs, and online communities, AMC fans celebrate the company's fearless design choices and engineering gambles. They embrace the weirdness of cars like the Matador or the Marlin, seeing them as badges of individuality. Where critics once mocked AMC's oddball designs, enthusiasts now celebrate them as brave experiments in a sea of conformity. And let's not forget Jeep. Every time someone drives a Wrangler over rugged terrain, or takes a Cherokee on a family road trip, they're experiencing a living piece of AMC's legacy. Jeep is the ultimate reminder that AMC wasn't just quirky, it was visionary. Without AMC's stewardship in the 1970s and 80s, Jeep might not have survived long enough to become the global powerhouse it is today. Chrysler, Daimler, Fiat, and now Stellantis have all built empires on the back of Jeep, but the roots of that empire trace back to AMC. What's even more interesting is how AMC's story serves as a lesson in the brutal realities of the auto industry. It shows how innovation can set trends, but also how financial weakness can erase a company from existence, no matter how groundbreaking its ideas were. It's a story of vision colliding with harsh economics, of creativity overshadowed by consolidation. And in today's world, where smaller EV startups are trying to challenge giants like Tesla, Toyota, and Volkswagen, AMC's story feels more relevant than ever. In many ways, AMC's rise and fall feels like a mirror for what's happening in the car industry today. Back in the 1950s through the 1980s, AMC was the scrappy outsider, trying to outmaneuver the giants with clever design, niche products, and partnerships. Today, we see the same playbook being used by electric vehicle startups, companies like Rivian, Lucid, and Fisker, all trying to carve out space against the established titans. They're betting on innovation, unique features, and branding that appeals to consumers who want something different. But AMC's story reminds us that being innovative isn't always enough. Without financial muscle, strong supply chains, and global reach, even the boldest companies can get swallowed up. The parallels don't end there. Just as AMC partnered with Renault for survival, today's EV startups are seeking lifelines from bigger players, whether it's Rivian working with Amazon and Volkswagen, or Lucid leaning on Saudi backing. AMC's Renault deal promised a new future, but in the end, it only delayed the inevitable. For modern underdogs, the same question hangs in the air. Will these partnerships keep them alive, or will they eventually lose their independence, just like AMC did? There's also the SUV connection. AMC's Jeep Cherokee in the 1980s reshaped the market and became the spark for the SUV boom. Today, we're watching EV startups gamble on creating the next big wave in automotive design, whether that's electric trucks, futuristic crossovers, or ultra-luxury EVs. If history repeats itself, one of these companies might create a segment-defining vehicle, just like AMC did with the Cherokee. But the risk is the same. Even if you invent the future, there's no guarantee you'll survive to profit from it. AMC's Untold story is ultimately a warning and an inspiration. It shows how a small company can leave an enormous impact, changing the direction of an entire industry. At the same time, it proves that the auto business is ruthless. Ideas alone don't win. Survival requires deep pockets and relentless execution. For every underdog that leaves a mark, there are dozens that vanish. AMC happened to vanish, but not before it reshaped cars, SUVs, and even the culture around them. And maybe that's why AMC still fascinates people today. It wasn't a faceless corporation. It was an underdog with personality, flaws, and flashes of genius. Its cars weren't perfect, but they were memorable. Its story wasn't one of endless dominance, but of struggle, creativity, and eventual disappearance. And maybe that makes AMC more relatable than the giants that crushed it. When Chrysler absorbed AMC in 1987, it might have seemed like the book had closed on the company. But in reality, it was more like AMC's second life. Chrysler didn't just buy a struggling automaker, they inherited engineering talent, ongoing projects, and a culture of scrappy innovation that would shape their future. The clearest example of this was the Jeep Grand Cherokee. That SUV, unveiled in 1992, had been developed under AMC before the merger. When Chrysler launched it, the Grand Cherokee became an instant sensation, redefining what a modern SUV could be. It wasn't just rugged, it was comfortable, stylish, and aspirational. In many ways, it was AMC's final masterpiece, unveiled under Chrysler's banner. Chrysler also inherited a different kind of thinking from AMC. While the big three were often slow-moving giants, AMC's survival depended on quick decisions and unconventional solutions. Some of AMC's engineers and managers carried that mindset into Chrysler, helping to spark creativity at a company that was itself fighting for survival in the late 1980s. You could argue that Chrysler's revival in the 1990s, with hits like the Grand Cherokee, the Dodge Ram, and even the cab-forward sedans, owed more to AMC's influence than most people realized. But AMC's afterlife wasn't just about Jeep. The Eagle brand, launched by Chrysler after the takeover, was essentially an attempt to carry forward AMC's experimental spirit. Cars like the Eagle Talon, developed with Mitsubishi, became cult favorites among enthusiasts in the 1990s. Though the Eagle brand didn't last long, it showed Chrysler was at least trying to channel AMC's willingness to be different. Even today, AMC's DNA is most alive in Jeep. Every Wrangler, every Cherokee, every Grand Cherokee is part of a legacy that began when AMC bet everything on buying Jeep in 1970. That single decision ended up outliving the entire company. In fact, Jeep has become so valuable that some argue it could stand as its own automaker today, worth more than Chrysler, Dodge, and Ram combined. Think about that. AMC, a company that vanished, created a brand that is now one of the strongest pillars of the global auto industry. And yet, AMC's ghost lingers in other ways too. Whenever automakers talk about compact efficiency, crossover versatility, or quirky design, they're touching on ideas AMC championed decades earlier. The Eagle AWD sedan, once dismissed as strange, looks today like a direct ancestor of the Subaru Outback and the crossover boom. The Pacer, ridiculed for being too odd, now feels like the kind of daring risk Tesla or Rivian might take. AMC's story shows that sometimes the ideas people laugh at in the moment are the ones that shape the future. Today, AMC's mythology is bigger than the company ever was in its lifetime. What was once mocked as odd or second-rate is now celebrated as bold, unique, and even visionary. Cars like the AMC Gremlin and Pacer, once the butt of jokes, have become cult icons at car shows, prized precisely because they were different. Enthusiasts don't see them as failures anymore. They see them as statements of individuality, proof that AMC wasn't afraid to build something nobody else dared to. In a world where modern cars often look alike, AMC's oddballs stand out like bright neon signs from a forgotten era. The collector market has also embraced AMC Javelins and AMXs, once overshadowed by Mustangs and Camaros, are now recognized as legitimate muscle cars with serious performance credentials.